Hello, so these are the organic notes that we were not able to cover in class. I would like you to know certain things for your naming and shapes test. Your shapes and bonding test. One of the questions you will need to know is why do we find such a wide variety of organic compounds in nature? All living things, most of the materials we use in our everyday life are organic in nature. Uh, our bodies, plants, animals, the food we eat, the drugs we take, the medicines we need, um, the textiles we wear, the bags we carry, the shoes we wear, everything is organic. Um, you should know what is organic. This is unlike everyday life where we say, oh, produce which does not have insecticides and pesticides added to it um, are or the plants that are grown without fertilizers and other chemicals are the organic kind. For a chemist, anything that's made of carbon is organic. And why do we have such a wide variety of organic compounds? Yes, if you look at the periodic table, you will find that carbon has four valence electrons. So it can bond to four other elements and make four bonds. That's the maximum an element can make according to us information that we have right now. Why doesn't silicon make an equal number of such compounds even though silicon has four bonds? Now, the reason is silicon cannot bond to itself because of its bigger size. And since silicon cannot bond to itself, but carbon can, we find a greater variety of carbon compounds than we find silicon compounds. Um, Here are some examples of organic compounds that are listed. You will be asked to provide examples of organic compounds. We are looking at compounds specifically, and you cannot tell, oh, plants, oh, the human body, because they contain multiple compounds in them. We need very specific examples. You can say aspirin, you can say insulin, you can say vitamin C. These are examples of organic compounds. Now, there are exceptions to this rule, all right? Carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide are not organic compounds, and you may not give them as examples of organic compounds. So know that they cannot be provided as examples. Um, you should know what are hydrocarbons, as the name implies. The compounds are made of carbon and hydrogen. Examples are propane, butane, octane, etc. These are widely used as fuels, and therefore we need to know what are hydrocarbons. Uh, because there is such a wide variety of compounds, what causes the difference in the different types of organic compounds? Now, this COOH group, kids sometimes call it COO group, however you want to say it to remember it, is an acid. We have done acids before, but what's the difference between the acids that we did before and this compound? This is an organic acid or a carboxylic acid group. It's an organic compound that behaves like an acid. Even though this compound is written like this, I can even rewrite this compound as CH3COH. This is vinegar. Now, if you look at the OH group, that's called an alcohol functional group. Now, CH3, CH2, OH is ethanol, and we can drink this. Now, definitely, we know that there exists a lot of difference between ethanol and vinegar. So, why are these compounds so different? The difference is due to their functional group. So, any compound that contains a C double bond O followed by an OH is an acid functional group. But there is no C double bond O, only the OH group is an alcohol functional group. Now, similarly, there are compounds that contain an NH2 group, and if they contain an NH2 group, they are called amines. So you will be required to look at structures like this on your test, and you will be asked to say if the given compound is an acid, an amine, or an alcohol. Now, so here are some examples that contain these functional groups in them. For instance, aspirin has the acid functional group in it. Um, we haven't really done the ester functional group, um, and we find that there is kind of an amine group. There is an N, not exactly H. It's called a tertiary amine. You'll learn more about it if you take more organic chemistry. Um, this is your Tylenol, acetaminophen, and it contains an alcohol functional group. So compounds oftentimes have multiple of these functional groups. Now, the next thing you need to know is what are saturated and unsaturated compounds. Saturated compounds contain only single bonds, unsaturated compounds have double or triple bonds. So, you will be asked to recognize, given a structure, which is saturated and which is unsaturated. Now, they are important because saturated and unsaturated compounds impact our health. If a substance is saturated, there is a likelihood that it will get deposited in our arteries, and saturated compounds are harmful, just as they say avoid saturated fats. Unsaturated compounds are not that harmful because they have kinks or bends in their structure, which arises because of the double or triple bond, and they can flow out. They get washed out by the blood in our veins. So they do not cause as many health problems as the saturated compounds. Now, among organic compounds, there are compounds that end with an ane, ene, and a yne, Ne. So, any compound that contains single bonds will have the ending ane. If it contains a double bond, it will end with an ene. And if it's a triple bond, it will end with a Yne. Now we have learned how to name inorganic compounds. We learned prefixes mono, di, tri, and tetra. But for organic compounds, there is no mono. If the compound contains one carbon, then we use the prefix meth. If it contains two carbons in it, then we use the prefix eth. If it contains three carbon, we use the prefix prop, and if it contains four, the prefix is but. The remaining prefixes are like those of the covalent compounds, like 5 is penta, 6 is hexa, 7 is hepta, 8 is octa, 9 is nona, and 10 is deca. So these are the prefixes, whereas the ones listed here are the suffixes. They end in those names. So, for example, if I want to name a carbon compound that contains two carbon in it, but all of them are single bonds, my prefix is eth, but my ending is ane. So the name of this compound is ethane. But if I have an organic compound that contains two carbon in it, but it has a double bond somewhere in it, then the prefix is eth because it contains two carbon, but then there is a double bond, so the ending will be ene. So this structure has the name ethene. Now, I can have another carbon compound with only two carbons but a triple bond between them. The prefix remain eth, but now the suffix changes to yne because it now has a triple bond. So, this is how organic compounds with multiple carbon atoms and single, double, or triple bonds are named. Now, moving on to another concept, you should know the difference between a monomer and a polymer. As the word implies, mono means one of something, poly means many of the same thing. Now, in your biology class, you have learned about biopolymers. You have learned that DNA is a polymer. Now, DNA is made of monomers, which is a sugar, a base, and a phosphate group. These repeat themselves to make the DNA. Similarly, you have learned that glucose or fructose are monomers and they repeat themselves to make carbohydrates, which are polymers. Similarly, you have learned that amino acids are monomers and they repeat themselves to form proteins, which are polymers. So these are the monomers, and your carbohydrate is the polymer. These three together form the monomer, and your DNA is your polymer. We not only have biopolymers, we also have synthetic polymers. Synthetic polymers are man made. It's very easy to distinguish between the monomer and the polymer in a synthetic polymer because vinyl chloride is the monomer and the only new word that's added before it is poly, so it becomes polyvinyl chloride. So if I give you polyethylene and ask you what the monomer is, remove the word poly and the remaining portion is your monomer, which is your ethylene. And there are many others that you will learn when you go to higher classes. So you should know to distinguish between monomers and polymers from your organic worksheet. Now, having completed these things, let us review some of the questions that you were asked to answer as a part of your notes sheet. So what are the answers you need to know? What does it mean for a compound to be an organic compound? Any carbon containing compound is organic. Why is carbon so special? It can form bonds with four other elements and form single, double, and triple bonds with itself. This enables it to form a wide variety of compounds. Now, what is a hydrocarbon? Carbon, hydrogen, carbon and hydrogen containing compounds are called hydrocarbons. You should know this, you should memorize it. If they ask you to match, that'll be an alcohol, that'll be an acid, and that's an amine functional group. So you will be given structures like this and you'll be asked to recognize your acid, your alcohol, and your amine functional group. So this is your amine functional group, this is your acid functional group, and that's your alcohol functional group. So they asked us to draw a box. So that is my acid. This is my alcohol. And that is my amine functional group. Now please realize that the OH within the acid is not an alcohol functional group. The whole thing is an acid and only an acid functional group. If you have a C double bond O, this will convert into an acid functional group. Since it does not have that, this is an alcohol functional group. So you cannot convert this into an alcohol. Remember that. This is only an acid functional group. Now, when you draw organic compounds, when you draw Lewis dot structure for organic compounds, please do not forget to put the two lone pairs on oxygen and the single lone pair on nitrogen. Now, there are a few things I need to teach you about drawing Lewis dot structures for organic compounds. Now, I need you to know what is the honk rule for organic compounds. Honk for organic compounds. It comes with a C at the end and not an end at the end, a K at the end. What does that mean? Hydrogen only has one valence electron and can make one bond. So in any organic compound, hydrogen should have a single bond. O should have two lone pairs and two single dots, and oxygen can make two bonds. Remember that you should always show oxygen with two bonds and two lone pairs. And anytime oxygen is in the structure like this, if it's bonded on two different sides, then the shape on oxygen will always be bent. Oxygen will always be bent. Now if you look at nitrogen, nitrogen has three single dots, or it can make three bonds. So you should always show nitrogen with its lone pair and three bonds. Can make three bonds, and you should always show nitrogen either having bonds on three different sides, or it can be nitrogen with a double bond on one side, a single bond, or it can be nitrogen with a triple bond. Similarly, oxygen can also be two lone pairs and two bonds on the same side, or a double bond. Now, whenever you have nitrogen, if nitrogen has bonds in three different directions, then it will be a trigonal pyramidal structure. You'll have to watch carefully if it forms a double bond and a single bond. It'll be bent in such a situation. And if it's only nitrogen forming triple bond, it's probably entering a linear structure. Now with carbon, it forms four different bonds. Carbon forms four bonds, and depending on if there are four different bonds, it will be a tetrahedral shape. If it's three bonds, with one of them being a double bond, it could be trigonal planar, or if it's a triple bond and a single bond, it could be a linear structure. So watch out. And you should always show the lone pairs on oxygen and nitrogen in any organic compound containing nitrogen or oxygen. Now remember, the acid functional group has a carbonyl group adjacent to a hydroxyl group. This is a hydroxyl group, and this is a C double bond O group. So together they make an acid group. You will not call this a separate alcohol within an acid group, whereas an alcohol only has OH, and then it's attached to carbon, but no double bond on the carbon. What does it mean for an organic compound to be saturated? All bonds are single bonds. Are single bonds. Now, if you count the number of hydrogens on these compounds, you know that this is C2 hydrogen 6. They are all single bonds, so they should end with an ane. So the name of the molecule is ethane. Now, if you count the hydrogen, it matches this compound, but there is a double bond, so the ending should be an ene, and that is your ene. Now, there are only two hydrogens, and that's the middle atom, and there is a triple bond, therefore it ends in a YNE. So now they're asking you to give, you will be asked to provide examples of biopolymer and the monomer that makes it up. So I can say that carbohydrate is my polymer, and the monomer that makes it up is glucose is my monomer that makes up my polymer. Now they want you to give an example of a synthetic polymer, so I can say polyvinyl chloride, and it's very easy to provide the monomer. This is the polymer, and the vinyl chloride is my monomer. Now, which is an example? The word poly tells me that this is my polymer.